Okay, I know that most of you have probably memorized this quote. This is from PC World back in 2010, which I think is interesting considering that this is 2 years later. But when the iPad came out, the thing that excited people so much about the iPad as kind of the first tablet, the real tablet computer, was it wasn't new and improved. It wasn't mimicking something and making it better. It didn't take an old idea and look at it from a different perspective. What it did was do something completely different. And the writer was pointing out the fact that things have changed so much that people do not even use their laptops and desktops now as their primary computer. The majority of people, on average, it's not everybody of course, I still tend to be a laptop person, but the majority of people on average are using their telephones as their primary computing device because it's with them all the time. So all their communication needs are met. They can get documents, move documents, send emails, that type of stuff. But the thing is, trying to see and read things on a phone is obviously, even with the really nice new phones now with the great big long screens on them, still is not that great. And I've heard of people actually watching movies on their phone, but to me that just doesn't seem to be all that attractive, such a small screen. iPad comes along and everything changed. And in 2010, sometime after 2010, I'm not sure what the exact date of this photo is, but this represents, somewhere the iPad's in there, but this represents all the other folks that said, we're going to do a tablet too. And the question was, well, why are we doing that? And primarily because of what Apple experienced in their sales. This is last year's fourth quarter, and just in that quarter alone, they did 11 million iPad sales. Multiply that times $499. That's a lot of revenue, or $449 or whatever it is. Anyway, that's billions of dollars in gross revenue for them. And everybody else said they wanted a slice of the pie too. And the fact that all these pads, iPad or tablet devices seem to look so similar tells us that the form factor that Apple came up with looked like it might be the right step, a step in the right direction. I think it's interesting to note that some of these have rounded corners, some of these have square corners, some of these have bigger screens than others, some have smaller screens, but they all look kind of like an iPad in some regard. So one of the things we wanted to bring to faculty, which we thought would be helpful, is to answer some questions that faculty have raised. And the most common question I have asked me is, should I buy a laptop or should I buy an iPad? And as Dave wisely suggested, the answer to that question isn't, well, buy this. The answer to that question is, what is it you really want to do? Because it makes a difference. The fact is that iPads will not replace a laptop. They don't do the same thing. They don't have a lot of the functions that the laptop has, although they seem very similar in some regards. You can type on them. You can do email on it. You can listen to music on it. You can go to the App Store. There's a lot of things you can do. What's different? Well, the differences in all these other things here. The big thing, or several big things, I'll just point out. One is, if you want to buy software for the iPad, you've got only one store to go to in the whole world. Fortunately, it's online, so it's easy to get to, but it's still one store, and you have to buy Apple stuff on Apple's store. Nobody else can sell it, period. Which is neither good nor bad. It's just something that you need to know. So if you had an Amazon Kindle, well, you can buy whatever Amazon has, although you can also buy things that were made for Android devices. The operating system is made by Google, which is called Android, but not so with Apple. Strictly that stuff. And it won't do everything you want. And we'll talk about some of the downsides of this a little bit further. I won't go into that now. I think one of the biggest changes, and this was not just a minor change, this was a change. Oh, look at me. Oh, I have to turn that camera around. See you guys. What a lovely group. There we go. Save that for posterity. Yeah, see, camera, scare you to death. This is primarily a consumption device. For instance, you don't do really intensive, detailed graphic design on a tablet. I suppose you could do a lot of writing if you had an attached keyboard. I could see that happening, although this doesn't have nearly the memory that your laptop or desktop's going to have, and it only has a fraction of the storage space that your hard drive has. So you're not going to make any real big things in there, and there's a lot of really serious professional software you don't get here. You just can't get it on the iPad. It's a consumption device. That's a whole different approach now to information. Originally the iPad was, or not the iPad, the computers were the students would, it was a creative device. It's what you could do with it. It's what you could build. You could build new things. You could model new things. You could do all kinds of stuff that you couldn't do before the computer. Now we've moved from the creation to the consumption. It's not a bad thing, but it is a major change. And it's something to keep in mind that these devices are made for consuming information more than creating new information and putting it out. The other thing is, again, the storage. This has 32 gigabytes, I think is what it has, something like that. That's it. My little notebook here has 320. That's a lot, of big difference. The other thing is, it's beginning to change, but printing from this, let's say I want to print from the printer in my office, can't do it. But if I go to Best Buy and I buy a consumer grade printer that has the new ePrint feature in it, it will print to that. That's a new, what do you call it, standard for printing from mobile devices. It will do that. And sharing files easily is sometimes not as straightforward as you would think on this type of a device. It's easier now than it was, but it's still not straightforward. But what do they help you do? That's the big question. Why would you want one of these other than they're so cool? Well, the fact is they really enable the content they do enable, that they bring you, is far more interactive, and because of its interface, the fact that you are not touching a keyboard to use this, you're actually touching the screen. You're doing things on the screen with your fingers that you normally don't do on a laptop. That tactile experience, I think, is also very attractive to the average person. It's a whole new way of interacting with the computer. They call it gesture computing, navigation by gestures. Have you ever looked at any of the new e-publish textbooks, digital textbooks? You know, they have, I think I have a few in the library on here, but the nice thing about them is the artwork and illustrations they put in those things can be far more detailed because you can zoom into them, see more things. They can be animated. They can include movies. You can have sound. Something obviously that a paper book isn't going to do for you. It doesn't make it better necessarily. It might be more interesting, engaging at some point, but it's just a different way to deliver information. One of the arguments is this, especially with the explosion in e-books. You get one device, you can put all your textbooks on here. Instead of a 50-pound backpack, you've got a 2-pound iPad or less. That's true, but you know, let's say that backpack costs you about $250 worth of textbooks in there or more, depending if you're a grad or undergrad student. Well, this cost you $499 first. So did you save money right up front? No, maybe later, but not right up front. The transition I was just talking about, not just print, but it has lots of other media types you can include in there. And this is my idea here, is that I still see this as a transition device. This was new. Apple did this, never done before. Nobody knew what this should look like, and they came up with this idea, and it caught on. And it was more of a time, Apple's in the right time, the right place, the right idea, because anyone could have done this if they'd have thought of it, because the technology was there. It's just Apple had to demonstrate it, and other people said, oh, now there's other ideas. The question is, I don't know what comes next. What's next? One of the things I would love to be next is I would love to be able to have this thing do what I tell it to do, rather than actually even having to touch it. or to simply talk to it and have it write for me, type for me. Now you can buy software. As a matter of fact, I think I have Dragon Naturally Speaking on my phone, but all it will do is email. But it does a pretty good job for that. I'm really surprised. I've been walking across campus talking into Dragon Naturally Speaking, and get back to my office, there's this email, and it's right. There's no spelling errors. That's kind of phenomenal for something on a telephone and walking through, while you're walking with all the ambient noise around you. The other thing, I understand why it's not done, but I personally feel that this should have a phone in it. If I want to carry one device, I don't want to have an iPhone. Of course, I know Apple wants me to have an iPhone and an iPad. This is, I don't want both. Let me have one or the other. So I would love to have this instead of it. What's happening is this type of form factor, this approach to delivering things is really changing how people think about education, how they think about productivity, how they think about communication. And you'll see that a lot if you go to academic conferences or technology conferences. You don't see nearly as many people carrying the laptop anymore. They're carrying something like the iPad, if not the iPad itself. Here's a brief list of some of the major universities that currently have iPad initiatives underway. Everybody's trying to find ways to use it, and everyone's actually, because they're all kind of focusing on something slightly different, there's a lot of good information coming out of these things. In the classroom is where I don't think they figured it out yet. I've read a lot of studies where people have used it at Duke, and where was the other one I was reading? It might have been Pepperdine, some others, where they used it in the classroom. They actually used it, I thought, very effectively, but in the process they learned things about the limitations of the iPad and how it impeded some functions and enabled others. But it's one of those things that educators are always looking to find new ways to engage the student and bring instruction and dialogue to the student. The significance of this stuff is kind of hard to miss. The biggest significant thing about it is that it's never been done before. This is new. This changed the rules of the game. The fact that people are asking, should I buy one of these or a laptop, tells you that the rules have changed big time. Even if there is a huge difference between these two devices, the fact that people have to ask that question means this device is doing something radically new that we've never been able to do before. It has a tremendous amount of computing power, that goes without saying. The big hullabaloo in education right now is using this as a repository for books, hundreds and hundreds of books. And there's also, Apple just released an application called iPublish, which is a tool for you to create your own e-textbooks and publish them yourself. They'll only work on the iPad, obviously. And I think all of Apple's textbooks, they made the deal with several publishers. I think there's something like, what, $4? They're $14.99. That's the most expensive textbook. Even it doesn't matter if it's chemistry, physics, or brain surgery, it's $14.99 if it's bought at their store. What people don't know yet, because it's just getting started, is creating an EPUB document is no minor thing. It's really, anyone can do it, but there's a lot of details you have to pay attention to. See?
So the iPub is only available on the iPad, or can you purchase that app for another Apple product,
Strictly
such as a laptop?
Well, it's free. You don't have to purchase it. You can get it. You can put it on your laptop and do all your work there. But I've been working. Actually, working is kind of it's been more than work. I've been going through a series of training online on how to create e-publications, and I'm using the Adobe Design Suite, Creative Suite. None of what they're telling you to do is conceptually difficult. It's just fairly laborious. And the hardest part really isn't how do you put this book together. The hard part is how do you write a really good book. Anybody can take the minutes of a meeting and turn that into an e-publication, but writing a really good textbook takes expertise in that field. It's going to take some artistic support work and some editorial support work. It's going to take if you're doing an e-publication that really leverages what's there, you're going to use sound, you're going to use video. It's all that stuff, so it can be quite complex. One of the amazing stats I saw just yesterday was in the year 2000, the number of books published was like 29 million or something like that. In 2011, it was 347 million. In 11 years, there was that much growth in e-publishing. Because what's happening, there's a lot of vendors online that are making it possible for you to publish your own book in small quantities and at low cost. And people are starting to publish themselves, which makes the whole editorial process of vetting publications a little bit more complicated now. But anyway, I'm running amok here. E-reader assistive tools, that basically means Apple actually has functionality in here so that the blind can use it. Now, it doesn't mean it does Braille on the screen, because it certainly doesn't. But what it does is it will read to you what's on the screen. The iCloud Dropbox storage, iCloud is a new technology from Apple. It's not a new technology, but it's Apple's brand of a fairly recent technology, which just means they'll give you X number of gigabytes for free to store things on the internet. And only you can get to them unless you turn something on and let somebody else get to it. Dropbox is more of a commercial vendor. Matter of fact, I think I have Dropbox on here somewhere. Because I've been using Dropbox a lot. I found it's real simple to use, and it's easy for me to find my files in this thing. And when it comes up, whoop, there's my curriculum vitae. Shoot, that's pretty shameless. That's not what I want to do. I just want to bring up my file list. There it is. So whatever I've saved there, off my computer at home, off my computer at work, I touch, boom, it's on my iPad. Or I can, whatever I have on my iPad, if I've downloaded it, I can say, put it in there, boom, then I have it when I get home. Photography, I was sharing this earlier. I love doing photography with the iPad. And the main reason I love it is because the iPad does something for old geezers that is really wonderful. That is, it gives me this great big viewfinder. So I can compose pictures really well now. Wow. And it doesn't have a zoom and anything like that, but boy, you know, it takes pretty good pictures. And I don't even have to put my glasses on to see who's in the picture. It takes video. It has Apple's FaceTime app on here, which means I can do live video chats with someone anywhere in the world with this thing. Real-time video calls, and plus Apple has tens of thousands of apps that were built specifically for their product. It attracted a lot of developer attention. What are the downsides? Actually, I'd like to emphasize this because I think one of the things that we don't do in education is we don't think as critically about technology as we should. Technology gives us lots of options and enables lots of things, but it always comes with a price. And those prices are not always dollars and cents. Sometimes they're in terms of interpersonal relationships or are shaping culture in ways that perhaps are not as what we'd hope they'd be. As we said, you can only get apps for this thing from Apple. The other thing is the sucker starts at $4.99? For the lowest priced one of these is $4.99. And this one will only work in a wireless environment. If you get the one that has a cell phone built into it so you can use it anywhere that you have a cell signal, that starts at $6.99 and goes up from there. I think it's way, way overpriced, but Apple's not having any problem selling them, so they're not likely to drop their price anytime soon. Another thing is Apple decided they would not support certain types of file formats. For instance, if you thought you'd like to use one of these to manage your Blackboard course, well, you can do a few things, but many of the tools like the discussion board and the gradebook and stuff in Blackboard are actually small little programs written in Java. They won't run on here. So from a student perspective, this might be great. From a faculty perspective, in terms of using it on Blackboard, it's really a non-starter. Another thing is, once you get it, the thing I always loved about computers was I could add more to it. To me, that was the romance of the computer. I bought my first computer back in 1977. There wasn't even an IBM PC at that time. Well, that's really, you guys weren't even born yet, were you? There was no IBM PC then. There was only Apple, and it was an Apple II Plus. Of course, it didn't look like anything that we have now, but it was during that same period of time with the Commodore 64. You could pop this lid and it had slots in there. And I remember, boy, mine was filled up. I had all kinds of things. I had extra processors in there. I had a card. My Apple II Plus would only do 40 columns, and it would not do upper and lower case. It would only do uppercase. Believe it or not, I wrote my wife's master's thesis on that sucker. That was painful. But that's how dedicated I was to using the technology. But I was able to plug things into it, give myself upper and lower case, give myself 80 characters, give myself CPM operating. What you get is what you get, which is not a bad thing, actually, because now I really don't need another thing. You know, if I need something, it's more of an application. It's not more hardware. The hardware is no longer the limitation in some respects. It's mostly the software. Where we're headed with this stuff, this is clearly, mobility is becoming an issue for day-to-day use. Interestingly enough, what I'm finding in higher ed is that, because there's a lot of talk about mobile learning. There's a huge amount of talk about mobile learning, has been for 5 years. Students are not interested in learning while they're on the move. That's my thesis, and the study I've been doing bears that up, and the research that I've been finding out in the journals is starting to show the same thing, that when a student consumes some instructional media or a podcast or whatever, they don't do it while they're riding on the bus or walking across campus. Because you know what they're listening to when they're walking across campus? Nothing to do with us. It's probably their favorite music or whatever. But when they're studying, they typically get in a place where they're focused. It's time to study. Now I'll listen. It was interesting, more than 90% of the respondents in my data collection for my dissertation said that they always, when they listened to the instructional podcast, it was in a focused setting, focused on studying. The mobility is something else. It's not about learning, it's about other issues. Productivity for faculty and staff, that's why you see so many of these at conferences. It's driving the explosion for e-publishment. The thing that's really made this such a hot topic is that this is not a replacement of something previous, as I said at the very beginning. This is a new way to get things done, and for that reason it's become very powerful. The last thing is, and I think this is very important for us as educators, is that the huge spike in interest in visual communication, whether it's by pictures, by video, by sound or other things, the students coming to us are really naive about the dangers of how they handle or process information in the internet or the cloud environment. And I think it's really important that we begin to talk about the impact of choices of how we, even when you're creating a PowerPoint, what is an effective way to create PowerPoint? We use it all the time. And I've seen in lots of classrooms that we're actually, matter of fact, we were talking to him yesterday. Oh, we were talking to him today at lunch in the faculty meeting. Somebody was saying, I wanted to use PowerPoint. I wanted to have like a teleprompter so I would know what my next point is to say, but I don't want to use PowerPoint to tell me that. And I laughed out loud and says, that's not what PowerPoint's supposed to do anyway. It's not supposed to tell the instructor what to say. So anyway, visual and information literacy is a major issue, I think, that needs to be kind of bubbling up a little bit higher in our interactions with our students, so they begin to understand what is good design and how do we really assess this information, how do we think critically about it, what are its implications. Of course, we're doing that type of thing with critical thinking in lots of ways, but often it doesn't get applied to technology. So any questions? Miriam.
Can you talk a little bit about differences in tablets like iPad versus other kinds of tablets?
Sure, I can talk a little bit about it. One of the major, since we said that one of the major commercial explosions regarding tablets, this is the Kindle Fire. And Terry, you have to actually tell me how this turns on. I don't even know. You have the magic touch. She can't turn it on either. Yeah. There you go. There you go. And I've mentioned this to others before. I actually love the iPad in many ways. However, and I've shared this with others, when you're reading, this has a marvelous reading display on it. I have a Bible thing on here that I use every morning when I'm reading my Bible, and it is so easy to read. That's my, 1 Timothy, or I can turn it this way and it's longer, that type of thing. When I have that setting in front of me, I can read that very, very easily. But if I move out of the room into an external environment, outside somewhere, this beautiful glassy clear screen here, there's so much glare on it, it's really difficult to read. Folks like the Amazon's Kindle, this one's focused more on, it's what it's about, reading, viewing videos. You can look at these anywhere because they have a different kind of screen, a different type of surface. They're not treating it like just a pane of glass. They've treated it in such a way that glare is reduced.
Can I see a little
Sure.
And with this, you can change your display to how you want things to show whenever I get in the right corner.
While you're working on that one, another thing is that on a computer, when you have a lot of information, organizing your information is really important, and we get used to creating folders and subfolders and things like that as some type of virtual structure for keeping things in groups. On this, you don't create any folders. You don't create any subfolders. There's no file system. There's nothing that's equivalent to the file system on the computer so that you can organize. Typically, your stuff, if you download stuff, it's within a specific application. For instance, if I download things in my email, all that stuff's in my email. If there are attachments, they're still in my email. If I download those files from Dropbox, they go into this little container that's just Dropbox files. It's not like I just have a place where I can say, here's my EDU 360 files. It doesn't have anything like that in there, so that's one big difference.